Good day and welcome to Big Bad Tech. I'm your instructor Jim Pytel, and today's topic of discussion is wind turbine hydraulic pitch systems. Our objective is to examine the hydraulic pitch systems found on some modern industrial wind turbines. We'll identify the purpose, examine the hardware, and discuss their function in normal operation and in emergency conditions. This lecture presumes the viewer has watched the Introduction to Industrial Wind Turbines, Wind Turbine Hydraulic Systems, Yaw and Rotor Brakes, and Wind Turbine Yaw Systems lectures, all available at the Big Bad Tech channel. The same housekeeping rules as cited in the aforementioned lectures apply to this same lecture. Notably, it is presumed the viewer brings with them a necessary foundation in electromechanical technology and an understanding that this lecture must necessarily limit itself to a simplified representation of a hydraulic pitch system and will not explore manufacturer-specific implementations for every turbine that ever has or ever will be constructed. Related to this qualification, we'll explore only general representations of the decisions made by the controller rather than real-world programmed instructions. Long story short, always consult the operations manual for the specific turbine of interest. This being said, you should find some commonalities between the simplified hydraulic pitch system as presented in this lecture and most modern industrial wind turbines. Let us begin. Viewers will recall that the act of pitching rotates the blades relative to the hub, which changes the shape of the airfoil exposed to moving wind, thus influencing the amount of mechanical power transferred to the main shaft, thus influencing the electrical power output by the generator. Generators operate at peak efficiency inside a given rotational speed range, and it is largely the responsibility of the pitch system to keep rotational speed inside that range despite variations in wind speed. Beyond maximizing generator output, the pitch system also serves as a primary means of decelerating the rotor in the event of a shutdown or an emergency condition. Pitching the blades such that they spill air is known as aerodynamic braking, and once significantly decelerated below a predetermined rotational speed, the rotor hydraulic brake can soft brake the rotor, and once brought to a standstill, hold it in place. This lecture will not explore the admittedly fascinating but ultimately unnecessary details of aerodynamics, and will limit itself to this simple and effective real-world experiment. On the drive to class tomorrow, I want you to stick your hand out the window of your car, making sure not to hit any trees, pedestrians, telephone poles, mailboxes, or other cars, and hold your hand at two different angles. One at 90 degrees so your hand slices cleanly through the wind, and again straight up and down at 0 degrees. People watching this lecture in Minnesota midwinter are exempt from this exercise until it warms up, which might be around August. There's an obvious difference in the amount of force that's transferred to your arm between the two different conditions. This is pitch control. When the blade is held at 90-degree angles such that it slices cleanly through the wind, minimal amount of lift force is transferred to the hub. When the blade is held at increasingly aggressive pitch angles, an increasing amount of lift force is transferred to the hub. Now get your hand inside the car because I think there's a cop following you. Wind turbines are no different. Inside the hub, the pitch system feathers or changes the angle of attack of the blades, such as they capture or shed more or less incoming wind power, thereby aerodynamically regulating the speed of the main shaft, thus influencing electrical power output. The blades are attached to the hub using a slewing bearing, similar to that encountered between the nacelle and tower, allowing the blade and hub to move relative to one another. As we learned in the wind water power lecture, a wind turbine power curve looks something like this. At the cut-in speed, when the turbine is first capable of exporting usable power, to the rated speed, that speed which the turbine reaches its rated output, the usable power output increases substantially given the cubic velocity term. Below the cut-in speed, the wind turbine doesn't even bother pitching the blades since it would be useless to do so and holds them at 90 degrees. Between the cut-in to the rated speed, the turbine will set the pitch angle of the blades such that they intercept the maximum amount of incoming power. Depending upon the aerodynamic profile of the blades employed, you might observe a pitch angle of, let's say, 5 to 6 degrees from the cut-in speed to the rated speed. This being said, there's a practical limit to the capacity and lifespan of the mechanical and electrical components comprising the turbine, and beyond the rated speed, the turbine starts taking active measures to protect itself and ensure its longevity. This manifests itself as the turbine flatlining output at the nameplate rating at speeds above the rated speed and below the cut-out speed. One of the principal means of regulating output is by pitching the blades such that they progressively shed more and more wind input. Presuming the rated speed occurs at 12 meters per second, you might see the turbine hold the pitch angle at 10 degrees for 14 meters per second, 15 degrees for 16 meters per second, maybe 20-ish degrees for 18 meters per second, and 25-ish degrees for 20 meters per second. Again, where these pitch angles are dependent upon the aerodynamic profile of the blades employed. At speeds above the cutout speed, The turbine effectively ceases production by aerodynamically braking the rotor with an extreme blade pitch angle of 90 degrees, such that the lift forces of the wind cease being transferred to the hub. Long story short, pitch control regulates how much wind power input is converted to electrical power output. Additionally, pitch angle is the single most influential property when it becomes necessary to rapidly decelerate a moving rotor. Two types of pitch systems are regularly employed in modern industrial wind turbines: electrical and hydraulic. We'll explore electrically pitched turbines in greater detail in later lectures, but here's a summary of their hardware and general operational principle as a means of comparison. An electrically pitched turbine uses an internally toothed slewing bearing, similar to the yaw ring, and a motor-driven gearbox and pinion gear. When the motor turns in one direction, the blade is pitched forward, and when the motor is turned in the other direction, the blade is pitched back. In the event the turbine loses power, an electrically pitched turbine needs to operate using an uninterruptible power supply, or UPS, and battery backup system, so it can pitch the blades to a feather position and decelerate the rotor. A hydraulically pitched turbine, the topic of today's lecture, in contrast, uses a single double-acting hydraulic cylinder, or if the blades are sufficiently massive, a pair of double-acting hydraulic cylinders working in coordination to change the pitch angle of the blade. Pivoting cylinder mounts allow the linear extension or retraction of the cylinder rod to change the rotational angle of the blade, such that when the cylinder is extended, the blade is pitched forward, and conversely, when retracted, the blade is pitched back. In the event of an emergency, a hydraulically pitched turbine also needs to pitch the blades to a feathered position and decelerate the rotor, only rather than relying on the stored energy of the battery to do so, it relies on pressurized fluid stored in an accumulator. We'll significantly expand upon this basic description in this particular lecture. Before doing so, it's probably worth a moment of our time to refresh our understanding of some basic hydraulic and pilot-level electrical components. You'll recall we did a mini review of hydraulics in the aforementioned wind turbine hydraulic systems, rotor and yaw brakes lecture, and revisited motor prime movers, pumps, reservoirs, filters, manifolds, pressure relief valves, two-position directional control valves, single-acting cylinders, and accessory energy storage and backup components like accumulators and hand pumps. Let's pick up where this mini review left off and discuss proportional valves, double-acting cylinders, and review cylinder mounting methods. You'll recall valves are fluid power components that modify flow rate, pressure, or direction of fluid flow. A subset of these valves, directional control valves, as the name implies, stop, start, and change the direction of fluid flow. Directional control valves have several identifiable features, notably ports, positions, and means of actuating, offsetting, centering, and or overriding them. Here is a two-port, two-position, solenoid-actuated normally closed valve with a manual override. When deactivated, the spring offsets it to the closed position, hence the name normally closed, such that it blocks flow. When the solenoid is energized or the manual override actuated, the valve shifts to the straight-through position and allows fluid flow. This is in contrast to a two-port, two-position, solenoid-actuated normally open valve with a manual override, which effectively exhibits the opposite behavior. When deactivated, the spring offsets it to the straight-through position, hence the name normally open, such that it allows fluid flow. When the solenoid is energized or the manual override actuated, the valve shifts to the closed position and blocks fluid flow. You'll recall we utilized these types of simple two-port, two-position directional control valves when we took a look at wind turbine yaw and rotor brakes. However, many more styles of directional control valves exist with varying levels of sophistication. Consider a four-port, three-position, double solenoid operated valve with a closed center position. When deactivated, the spring centers the valve to the closed position such that it blocks flow. When solenoid A is energized, the valve shifts to the straight-through position and allows full unrestricted flow from P to A and B is dumped to tank. Conversely, when solenoid B is energized, the valve shifts to the cross-connect position such that full unrestricted flow goes from P to B and A is dumped to tank. Keep this particular directional control valve in mind because we'll re-examine it with some modifications after we quickly review flow control valves. You will recall a flow control valve, as the name implies, controls flow rate in a hydraulic system and directly influences actuator speed. As the size of the orifice in the adjustable flow control valve is decreased, less fluid is permitted to enter the hydraulic system, and actuators would extend or retract slowly. Conversely, as the size of the orifice in the adjustable flow control valve is increased, more fluid is permitted to enter the hydraulic system, thus the actuators would extend or retract quickly. In summary, by varying the size of the orifice, one directly influences flow rate, thus directly controlling the speed of the actuators. Now combine these two aspects, directional control and flow control. In the previous 4-port, 3-position directional control valve example, we presumed that when solenoid A was energized by full pilot level voltage, it fully shifts the spool from the fully blocked closed center position to the fully straight through position and permits full unrestricted flow in that direction. The same thing could be said for solenoid B, only in the opposite direction. While this bang-bang style or fully off or fully on control might be suitable for some applications, other applications might be better suited for variable speed. I am, of course, referring to analog control afforded by proportional valves. You recall we examined proportional valves extensively in the proportional valves lecture, available at the Big Bad Tech channel. A proportional valve is essentially a directional control valve that, in addition to stopping, starting, and changing the direction of fluid flow, also simultaneously offers the ability to control the rate of fluid flow through them. Two features differentiate proportional valves from regular directional control valves. 1. The solenoid of a proportional valve is analog in nature rather than digital. Regular solenoid-operated directional control valves necessitate the application of full voltage for it to shift from one position to the next. In contrast, the analog solenoids found in a proportional valve shift in an amount proportional to the applied voltage, hence the name. When half voltage is applied to a solenoid, it shifts the spool halfway. And when 3/4 voltage is applied to the solenoid, it shifts the spool 3/4 of the way between two positions, and so on. 2. Whereas the spool of a traditional directional control valve affords a clear separation between the lands and valleys, a proportional valve spool has notches cut in the spool, such that when it is partially shifted from one position to another, it offers a means of varying the size of the orifice between the two positions, thus a means of varying flow rate. If one necessitated rapid movement in the forward direction, one could apply full voltage to the A solenoid and fully open the passage from P to A. In contrast, if one necessitated slow movement in the forward direction, one could apply low voltage to the A solenoid and partially open the passage from P to A, and so on. The same thing could be said for solenoid B.